Hi, I'm Ken Phelan. I'm the CTO for Gotham Technology Group. This is part of our ongoing session of CTO Tech Talks with interesting and smart people. And Boyan, you are both interesting and smart. I'm here with Bojan Simic, who is the CEO of HYPR. HYPR is well, I'll let you tell everyone what HYPR is. I think I know, but you probably know better. So do a little quick intro and explain to everyone what HYPR is doing for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So HYPR is a New York City-based company. We are in the identity security space, and we've been doing this for 11 years. So when we first started this company, identity was typically its own thing in companies, and security was a completely separate thing. And in the last few years, we've seen these worlds colliding like never before. And we've been really focusing on delivering products and capabilities to help mostly larger enterprises, but organizations of all sizes make sure that their employees, their customers don't have to worry about identity threats anymore. And depending on which report you read on which month, anywhere between 60 and 80% of security breaches are due to somebody doing something stupid with a credential. And
Yep,
we're trying to make sure that that doesn't happen anymore.
that's awesome. No, we've definitely seen this big shift. I mean, it's been a long time coming, but it's not coming back. I think we've seen, you know, whatever back in the olden days, back when my hair was my beard was a little less gray. We had people come to an office and the servers were in the data center and the world was what it was, and security was a perimeter concept by and large 20 years ago. And now the people are all over, so that's no longer a thing. And your services are all over. Your services are up in the cloud. They're all over, whatever. So there's no physicality to it. So this, I mean, I'm sure you've heard this a billion times, but I'll say it for anyone who hasn't heard it. Identity is the new perimeter. And there's really nothing more critical than making sure the people are right. You think we're starting to learn a little bit? Are we getting better? Or
I definitely don't think I definitely don't think we're getting better, unfortunately. It was interesting to there was a GitLab threat intel report I think yesterday that came out. And I think many of the folks who are listening or watching this probably have heard about like North Korean infiltrators at companies.
Mhm.
Um, and GitLab put out a report recently where they said, how North Koreans have generated 130 plus synthetic identities and made millions of dollars through freelance jobs just recently, um, across various platforms. So this concept of going into an office every single day is just something that isn't a reality for businesses anymore. Um, the vast majority of businesses now want the flexibility of hiring the best talent and wherever they may be. And that brings a whole slew of identity related issues associated with it. And so, um, just when the security industry started implementing MFA and, started finally understanding why it's important, we started seeing this entire shift to remote work. And now with AI tools available, being able to bypass the vast majority of authentication controls, it's things are shifting drastically. And little things like, many companies relied on before, like security through obscurity, right?
Yep.
Where I'm a smaller shop, or I'm not in the United States, or I'm not in a financial sector, so I don't have to worry about hackers as much because, they're not targeting me because, there's not as many resources they can get. Well, now that a lot of these attacks are fully automated, they're going after those, those lesser value targets because it's much cheaper to do so. And so we're seeing a whole broad set of attacks against these companies where, you know, I'll give you an example. Like if a company, let's say if their help desk was primary, let's say the company was in Latin America and their help desk primarily speaks Spanish. Well, they didn't have to worry about, Russian hackers calling in, trying to trick their help desk who speak English, because Russians typically don't speak Spanish. But now, like
Right.
they do, right? Because they can just put their voice through an AI tool and they can be fluent in Spanish and sound credible and be able to execute a social engineering attack. So it's just amazing to see how these threats have evolved. And I think we're further back uh, further behind the eight ball than we ever were from an identity perspective these days.
Well, the AI is killing us. I mean, we have a staffing organization does a lot of great work for our clients, places candidates, as whatever. But the candidate fraud thing, I mean, the North Korea thing is an outlier with that, but there's so much candidate fraud. It's so easy for somebody to kind of use an AI. They have these AI tools that come up in the interviews, so you can seem somewhat confident. But people are really having trouble making sure that people are real. And again, to your point, it's all remote, so the person doesn't kind of walk in there. So the concept that this isn't the person it's supposed to be is turning into a real challenge for organizations.
Yeah, businesses, they think that like the 30-year-old I-9 process is sufficient, which
Right.
is
Yeah.
I hire somebody, I show my driver's license to the screen, or I
Yeah. Yeah.
upload some sort of document. Like that's not it. On the dark web, it costs about $15 to buy a synthetic identity that will pass a background check. And so the barrier of entry is so cheap for the adversaries that like those checks are just no longer viable for a lot of organizations. And so, especially for remote workforces and contractor populations, this concept of continuously verifying somebody's identity is something that organizations will ultimately have to move to, unless they
Right.
want to just require everybody to be in an office 8 hours a day or 9 hours a day and make sure that they never do any corporate work outside of that, which just isn't feasible.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of like back to office, like kind of news reels, depending on what you're watching. But if you're watching Jamie Dimon, you're seeing a lot of back to office. But yeah, it's not hasn't been my experience. Other than some large banks, most people are kind of just going remote. And even the banks, there's a lot of remote, right? They have overseas. But look, for years, you could walk into, a giant room in India and see a bunch of cubicles with RSA tokens taped to the cubicle because you were just going to log in as a spot, not a person.
Yeah.
And that's really not identity, right? That there's all of that kind of fluctuation out there. And I know you guys have been working on that problem. So I think, and I guess, well, actually, I just want to say this too, because we're talking the AI stuff. I mean, it's just the attack vectors and the personalized phishing and the personalized structures. Like, I the only reason it hasn't blown up more now is because they don't need to do anything better than what they're already doing because they're already winning. Truth of the matter is, there's so many capabilities. I saw Checkpoint's AI report came out about a month ago, and we just need to be ready for this massive upswell of automated attacks. To your point, with multilingual, totally together. I mean, do you think? I mean, I guess I want to hear your comment on that. I mean, what do you think that attack surface looks like in terms of people going after that in the next 18 months?
Yeah, I think there's so much automation that can be done using AI tools in particular. So it's what we're seeing is more and more of the quote unquote kill chain is being automated, right?
Right.
And so for the first thing that we saw, which was the low hanging fruit for the hackers, was we're going to make every single phishing email look super accurate and super critical. Like
Yep.
we used to train people like look for spelling mistakes or grammar issues, and like
Yeah. No.
that doesn't apply anymore, right? So
Right. Right.
now every phishing email is a spear phishing email because it
Right.
has context and awareness and is directed to that specific individual and their role. So that was like the first domino to fall when it comes to automating a lot of these attacks. Now it's about chaining these different methods, which is combining the email with a voice phone call, with a WhatsApp message that is all driven by AI to make it look like something is on fire to create that panic so that somebody pushes a button or gives a
Yeah.
credential or something like that, right? And so, and sometimes it's about just annoying people,
Yeah.
so hackers will sometimes just message employees and say like, hey, this is your IT team. We really need access to this now. It's, stuff's on fire, so on and so forth, and just keep doing it until the person finally accepts. The darker side of this can get pretty extreme though. And so this is something that we've seen in some cases, but not too many. But now with like AI image generation, like a hacker can do some pretty simple research, especially using AI to figure out your family dynamic, right? Where your kids go to school, things like this, and use AI to create images that look very real, that creates a emotional response where like you don't want to leave it. If you're an employee at a large enterprise, you're a cog in the wheel.
Right.
Like you're not gonna take the extra 10 seconds to think through, is this real or fake, if you think your child's life is potentially in danger.
Right.
Like you're just gonna give the credential. Like you don't want to leave it to chance. If there's a 2% chance that this is a real thing, like I'm gonna give that password to that system, regardless of
Yeah.
what the situation is.
No, it's very fair, and it's sometimes not even that extreme because I think, but I have been talking to people about this. You want something that's strong enough that there's an emotional response. So like we saw a spearfishing campaign the other day that basically was like they knew the company was using one of the top payroll providers, and so they came in pretending to be that payroll provider, but they needed to be like a little bit annoying in terms of like click on this. We see that your vacation balance has fallen to zero. If you don't think this is true, click on this. And everyone got my vacation balance is zero. Yeah, they start clicking on it. So like you just create some kind of like so they you kind of bypass the executive function of the brain and you kind of get right into it. So no, we're going to see a lot
Yes.
of that stuff.
So where we've been focusing is like how do we implement security controls to make sure that even in these situations, these emotionally charged situations, employees can't make mistakes, right?
Right.
So when it comes to things like passwordless authentication, some of our clients actually call it a non-shareable credential initiative,
Mm, okay.
where they want to create a technical environment where an employee, for example, or even a customer cannot share a credential with somebody else, even if they wanted to.
Right.
And so what that does is it creates an environment where even if a hacker executes a phishing or invokes some emotional response from that individual, that person physically can't do something that hurts the organization
Well, that's fair.
from a credential perspective. So I think that's where we have to go. Like we have to kind of protect people from themselves because we're all emotional beings
Yep.
and we have to make sure that like the controls that we put in place remain a good user experience, but at the same time can't be used for nefarious purposes.
Maybe just what I was thinking about this. Maybe just like go on a journey here through. Like, first of all, not everyone's got any kind of MFA, which statistically, scientifically is plum dog crazy, right? Like nothing has been more effective at stopping stuff besides MFA. I mean, I don't know. Let me start. Let me start with that. Like, what do we have to do to get these people to not like these there's companies like what's going on with somebody who doesn't have any kind of MFA and how do you see that part of the process? And then we'll get deeper into the types of MFA and like what that means. But like that just I did the statistics. I think it was like maybe 60% of companies have MFAs. I mean, it's just I don't know what you think the number is,
Yeah, I
but
think it was like the last one was like 56% of companies have MFA, which
right,
is crazy to think about. And so I think the reason for it is most organizations just don't want any type of friction, right?
right,
And the bulk of these organizations also like they may not be in situations um, where they feel like that they are a target for hackers.
right,
So if I run a manufacturing facility or something that has some computers in it, well, 20 years ago, chances are those computers weren't connected to the internet or connected to some internet connected device. Now they are.
right.
But that old mentality still remains. So people just sometimes don't implement a control until they learn the hard way.
Yeah, but it's also, I mean, that goes back to this whole issue of I don't think we talk enough about how many people are compromised, whatever. No one has to share the data, share the compromise. So when and I know it's hard for me because I sit in this place where like I'm a doctor, so everyone I see is sick. But I do feel like everyone gets sick. Like I just, like I see all that stuff. So it's hard to kind of talk people through that. I also think there's this old school concept, maybe you agree about. Well, we use MFA for privilege, like supervisor, administrative type stuff, but users don't need it. And I'm like, I don't think you understand how bad it can get with a compromised user.
Yeah, all you need is your foot in the door in a lot of these situations because that once you get your foot in the door, even if your regular user just has the ability to use basic Office functions, the fact is they probably have enough permissions to see like the internal structure of the business,
Yep.
right? So they can see who's doing what, who's responsible for what, and then that is a wedge to then execute a much more targeted and specific attack that is likely to result in the desired outcome. So I think that's like the fallacy that a lot of folks have is like, oh, this person just has access to email. Well, that's a pretty big deal.
Right. Right. All right. So let's go through and again, like there's obviously there's lots of things, ways to talk about MFA, and I think whatever I start like maybe I can just uh, I'm going to text you a number. I'm going to this. I'm going to that. And you guys obviously represent sort of this gold standard 5.2 whatever. But I don't think people understand the like what the different benefits and problems are. So like I'll start with the most simplest thing, right? This SMS based. I'm going to text somebody a number. Like how secure is that? What's wrong with it? Has it been breached? How often does it get breached?
It's better than nothing. So I'll say that. It's better than nothing for sure. But this is one of those situations where um, depending on the MFA control like SMS, we think about what is the level of effort to bypass it, and can that effort be automated?
Right.
So SMS was a really good 2FA method 10 years ago,
Yeah.
because the barrier to automate that process, to bypass it, was pretty significant. Right now, however, there are just so many ways to automate the bypass of SMS OTP where you know people can get sent links to phishing sites that says we just send you a code, put it in here, right?
Right.
Or they can get a phone call that says we just sent you a code, give it to us, this is your bank. The other one is SIM swapping, right?
Right.
So if I can call up your mobile provider like Verizon and convince them that I'm you by providing some pretty basic information, I can get your phone number swapped over to my SIM card, and then I
Right.
am essentially you. I will get that code instead of you.
Right.
So there's multiple methods now to bypass SMS OTP, ranging from SIM swapping to social engineering to phishing. And those methods in recent years have become highly automated. And,
Right.
and so that's why one example of this is the United Arab Emirates. Their central bank last year actually mandated that all UAE banking institutions are no longer allowed to use SMS OTP as a 2FA factor.
Right.
I think the US and Europe will start adopting that soon as well.
Yeah.
And that's going to cause a ripple effect throughout the industry, I think.
Yeah. My I have a local bank. My local bank sends me this SMS, and again, like that bothers me because it's my money, right? I don't want to lose my
Dude, Chase sends me SMS.
money.
Like, come on, guys. Yeah.
Listen, at least they're making you do something.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so then so again, climb up this MFA hill of mine. I think I would put the next category as sort of like these applications, right? Google Authenticator, and there are people who have apps, right?
hmm
And I think that's sort of I would say that's in my mind. That's the next. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but you live here. But I'm like that. Like that's sort of the next level up from this sort of SMS email authentication is like having an app. I'm going to guess they're better, but like maybe you can help. What's good and bad about that?
Yeah, so there's the MFA apps have two primary controls in them. So one is you get the rotating 6-digit code that you punch
Yep.
in, right? And then some of them will also, or as an alternative, send you a push notification that you have to accept,
Right.
right? So um, depending on the app, like some of them support all these functions or just one of them. But these are also vulnerable to phishing attacks in particular.
Yep.
So
Yep.
if we look at uh, a recent example, I think this was a couple years ago where Uber got breached.
Yep.
Um, there was an IT administrator who was working at Uber, and the hacker had figured out his password,
Mhm.
right? But they had 2FA, and the hacker had to accept a push notification in his Duo app
Right.
to to and so what the hacker did was just kept message the Uber employee on WhatsApp, said, "Hey, this is your IT team. We're doing some system maintenance. We know we need you to accept this notification when you get it." And the employee got the notification, accepted it. They were not the ones who initialized that notification.
Hmm.
So basically the hacker got access to his account and then was able to use that as the wedge to move throughout the organization laterally. So that's like a typical push bombing or prompt bombing.
Hmm.
How many times have you been on your phone where you have like 50 notifications from the same app and you just pick one?
Right.
Well, like if a hacker sends you 50 push notifications and you've sent yourself one, like what makes you
Right.
confident that you're accepting the right one?
Right.
So push bombing or prompt bombing is a very popular bypass method of those 2FA apps. And then if you're looking at this OTPs, the 6-digit rotating codes, like in your Google Authenticator or whatever, or a similar app, those are also just vulnerable to phishing and social engineering. So
Right. Right.
I'll set up a website that looks just like your bank website, and I'll send you a link to it, and it'll ask you for that OTP code, and you'll
Right. Right.
punch it in, and then I'll use that to get access to the system. So um, these systems are now highly automated. There are open source tools like EvilGenX.
Mhm.
There's plenty of videos on YouTube you can go on. I think we have one on our own YouTube channel where we're using these tools to like automate the bypass of OTP and MFA apps.
Right. Yeah. They're good. So again, I'm obviously leading the witness, but like you guys do something different, right? You're FIDO certified, which I think you should talk about a little bit what that means. But and the biometrics. So maybe you can explain like the difference between how you guys are approaching that and how you're solving for those other issues. Is it sort of climb this MFA hill of ours?
Yeah, so back in like 2015 timeframe, one thing happened that was really key, and that was smartphones have become just extremely commonplace. And
Right.
two is the smartphones that started being sold in the market uh, were deployed with separate chips in them used for security functions.
Right.
So if you recall back in like 2012, 2013, 2014, like there were so many like security issues with like Android phones and iPhones because all the credentials that were used on the apps that were running on those phones were in the same memory as the apps
Right.
themselves. And
Yep.
so in 2015 timeframe, the newer phones started isolating where credentials were kept away from the apps themselves. And so this really paved the way for the ability to store credentials securely on a mobile device and be able to use those credentials in a way that is much more secure than those traditional methods that we just discussed. So this is how the FIDO standards ultimately came to be, which is we wanted to make authentication systems that were impervious to phishing and social engineering, which means that employees and anybody using the standard were unable to share a credential either willingly or unwillingly. And so what this resulted in was ultimately the device providers, the Googles, Apples, Samsungs of the world are all got aligned behind the FIDO standards, and they incorporated the FIDO standard functionality within these devices. And so this really enabled organizations to start deploying phishing resistant authentications, FIDO certified authentication. And the way that this stuff works is it's actually one of those like what's old is new again situations. So if you look at like the government and military space, they've been using like these physical access cards, these common access cards that have cryptographic keys on them for the longest time. Where if you want to work on government issued laptop. You take this card, you stick it in the laptop, then it has credentials on it that are used to
Yep.
access the government systems. Well, all of that stuff has now been virtualized inside phones,
Right.
right? So you have that same level of security without all the hassle and operational complexity that the government imposes on their employees because they can, right? And
Right.
so it's infinitely more secure. There is no push notification that can be accepted. There is no one-time code that can be punched in and stolen. All of this happens by ensuring that the device that you're authenticating on has proximity to the thing that you're accessing. And you typically unlock the key that's on your device, on your phone, by using a biometric, so your Face ID or your Touch ID. For those of you who are familiar with like YubiKeys,
Hmm.
right? It's like the same thing, right? You plug in the key, you push the button, and that unlocks the credential that is on that key to be used for authentication. You can't like if you're using a YubiKey, for example, like you can't take the credential off that key and give it to somebody else, right? The
Right.
worst thing you can do is drive to somebody else's house and give them that key, and then they can be you.
Right.
But like for the vast majority of adversaries out there, they're guys sitting in Belarus, like behind a computer. Like they're trying to execute remote-based attacks. They can't. And so the whole point of this is how do we limit the attack surface to ensure that the only way that a hacker can get into a system is if they have physical control over a device that was issued to that person,
Right.
or a credential that was issued to that person. And that just, it changes the economics of the game, right?
Right.
Because now instead of going after millions of people at once using these automated tools, I have to go user by user by user. And that's such a higher barrier to execute a successful attack that hackers will just focus somewhere else.
No, that's really interesting. Um, and obviously you guys, have done a great job with you have to have the phone and you have to have the biometrics. So it's a specific like keyed in thing. I guess I want to go. So having climbed the hill and understood that, how you guys are doing all that stuff, whatever, I think, like you guys have a very smart, technically appropriate, secure way of doing this. But then we go back to our initial conversation, which was friction. Like to me, like the thing that's in the way for everybody is is it hard to use? Is it hard to deploy? Do the users hate it? And by the way, Gotham has Hyper. My users don't hate it. But I want to hear from you, like, because I think that's one of the areas like that you guys have made big investments that where investments are needed, frankly. Like we've got to make people secure in a way that doesn't piss people off. So, right. So, talk about that for a little bit. Like, well, operationally, how do we get better and easier?
Yeah, we went through that MFA journey, and most of the time when we add a factor of authentication, it's just that it's additive to what we were already doing, right? So we were
Right.
using passwords, and now we're adding this MFA thing on top of it.
Yeah.
With this FIDO-based authentication, you can have two factors of authentication in a single motion, right?
Right.
And the best part of it is like you don't have to remember a password anymore, ideally. And so when that's the reality, you're able to save users time and you're able to reduce the frustration of logging in, especially when people forget a credential or they type their password in wrong too many times. Like that's one of the most frustrating things that we can go through on a work day. And so just eliminating those moments from ever being a concern is something that people really enjoy, right?
Right.
But at the same time, we're humans, and humans typically don't like change, even when it's positive change. So
Right.
one of the things that we've seen companies really do well is treat this as much a security effort as it is a user experience benefit effort,
Hmm.
and really taking a education-based approach to show employees how it's better for them. And so most of our customers, they use a carrot approach, not so much a stick approach, although some do
Okay.
use a stick approach. But So we've had some customers say like, okay, well, you can have this passwordless technology that's terrific and easy to use, or you can use a 21 character password every time you log in.
Right.
And so that way, people are motivated to at least try it.
Right.
Um,
21 characters
others,
rotating
other,
every 2 weeks.
yeah, yeah, you're gonna have to rotate, yeah. And so every fortnight you must rotate your password, and it has to have 10 symbols and 11 numbers. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Like once people actually start using it, they never want to go back. And
Right.
there's been so many instances where, we have like a customer who's deployed Hyper, and one of their employees goes to another company, and they're just like they immediately go to their IT team, and they're
Right.
like, "How come we don't have this?" Like they
Right.
go to another company where they're still using passwords all the time. They feel like they're in the Stone Ages.
Right. Right. No, I think there's a critical mass too. I mean, you were saying that people are starting to use this for consumer applications too, which I think is fantastic. But I think, and again, much more people are more concerned about friction with their customers and their employees typically. But if you look back 20 years ago, people were mad when they had to get an SMS, and then they got used to that, and they got used to having to use an authenticator. And there's a sort of a critical mass. I mean, how far away from that do you think we are? I mean, obviously, you hope we're close, but I think people are getting used to this issue, are they not?
I think this is my my view is that um, a lot of these changes that you just described are typically compliance or regulation driven.
Right,
Um, and so I think what's happening more recently is a lot of the regulators are requiring that that anybody who has to comply to their regulations goes through these phishing resistant authentication methods. And so 3, 4 years ago, it was guidance.
yep,
Now it's becoming compliance. And so the writing is on the wall, right? I think in a few years, any app that's still using SMS or OTP in an app is going to be uncompliant with certain regulations. And it's going to be a waterfall type of thing, right? Where the highly regulated industries, financial services, insurance, payments, critical infrastructure, like they'll be the first ones to have to adopt this stuff, and then it'll reach a critical mass where everybody else is doing it too. Um, but I think typically a lot of these security controls, for them to reach critical mass, unfortunately, like regulators have to be the ones pushing it. On the customer side, though, it's a little bit different, where user experience is king. If you
right,
can provide a better user experience, you can differentiate from your competition and you can get more customers. And so this is an area where we're seeing things like passkeys really starting to get a lot of traction recently.
right,
So like recently, the Wells Fargo mobile app released passkeys.
hmm
JPMC recently released passkeys. So a lot of these like larger financial institutions have released passkey support for their applications, more so in an effort to streamline the user experience. And
right,
the one area where they're really streamlining user experience is in the device recovery flow. So
right,
let's look at the scenario where a banking customer gets a new phone.
right,
So they get a new phone, they trade their old one in at the Apple Store or at Verizon or whatever.
hmm
And one of the first things they do is they download their banking app on their new phone.
right,
And the first thing that they are asked for is their password.
right,
Well, guess what? They haven't typed their password in since they got a new phone last year,
right.
because they always just use Face ID, right? So what happens is
Yeah.
you put in your password and then ask you, do you want to set up Face ID? Of course I do. And then you do
Yep.
so. And then you never use your password again. Well, what happens when the person gets a new phone and they're asked for their password? They go, oh shit, I don't know my password. And then they have to go through the credential recovery process, which oftentimes includes a phone call to the bank service desk.
Right.
Now, that's not a huge issue for the everyday person, maybe. It's kind of painful, but every October the new iPhone comes out and
Right.
millions of people do this. So that is a massive cost to the bank. So one of the things that passkeys are really powerful for is that new device scenario where when you enroll a passkey with your banking app, that passkey is synchronized across all your Apple devices or your Android devices, depending on which platform you're on. So when you get a new phone, that passkey immediately gets put on your new phone, and then you can immediately log into that banking app without having to type in the password.
Right.
That one little shift in user experience saves banks tens of millions of dollars every year because they don't have to staff as many people. Like one of my first ever jobs as a teenager was working at Circuit City. And I got a job at as a seasonal worker because during the holidays, like they need more folks. The banks do the same thing with these scenarios where new iPhones come out, where they have
Yep.
to staff up because there's going to be a flood of calls coming in.
Mhm. That's crazy. I have a good hyper story on my side. So I told them when we use hyper Gotham, but there's still a Microsoft password that you have to change every now and then. So it used to be before I had hyper, changing my password would be like I'd have to like block 3 hours of my calendar to go like change every place where it is and my phones, my this, my that. Like it was like it was an annoying like day as that cycle came, whatever the 90-day cycle of that. And by the way, now it's because we're using Hyper for that. It's because Hyper does the back end on all of the different devices, so it's just basically a much simpler thing. So you make my life easier, plan for whatever that's for.
Thank you. Yeah, it's one of those things where like things are starting to shift the environment. Like lots of organizations are deploying or have deployed like Windows Hello for Business, for
Yeah.
example, which
Right.
is terrific. It's actually a phishing resistant authenticator,
Yep.
but it's limited to the computer that you're on. Right. So
Yeah.
if you use your Windows Hello for Business on your computer, terrific. You shut your laptop, you go on your iPad, and you go to log into your single sign-on to view your email or to log into some app. Now you're back to typing in a password.
Yeah. I
About
mean,
eliminating passwords, like we have to think about it across all these angles where
yeah. Yeah.
the typical organization has to still use them and think about how do we eliminate these things in each of these areas.
I don't know. I do think the culture is shifting though, but I hear you that regulation really is going to drive a lot of it. But to me, it was always frustrating that I had to use an authenticator to get to log into my World of Warcraft account because they wanted to make sure no one was stealing my World of Warcraft gear. But my bank was much more flippant at the time. And I was like, maybe I care more about my actual money than my super broadsword or whatever the frick I have.
Yeah, the Steam MFA
Yeah.
process is just so painful.
Yeah. Correct.
But yeah, that's
Correct.
where a lot of fraud happens is those video game systems, right? And like, if I can sell this sword on eBay on World of Warcraft for $1,000, it's a lot easier than, trying to
Right.
crack into JP Morgan Chase.
Yeah. Well, I also think that's one of the things helping the big banks make this change too, besides the regulation, is the fraud dollars are so real and the fraud loss is so real, and fraud really is an identity problem. I think there is a motion in the banks, somewhat separate from the regulatory motion, to fix identity on a fraud basis. I mean, and obviously when you do the consumer stuff, it's the fr- banking fraud against consumers, particularly against the elderly and that kind of stuff, is just gotten so huge. I don't know why people aren't making that motion. I mean, do you see the fraud space driving a lot of business too?
It's amazing. Like, so in a lot of organizations, like the fraud team is very independent of the identity team,
Right,
and they never talk to each other, which is baffling
right,
to me.
right.
And so, the fraud folks, they're always like trying to do more analytics and more like heuristics and things like
Yeah,
that to
yep,
pro to like squeeze a extra 1% reduction in fraud. And they
yep,
spend lots of money doing that.
yep,
And they just don't know that there are better ways. So a lot of times when
yeah,
we speak to fraud teams, they're just like, I didn't even know this was possible.
right,
And
right,
so like we're oftentimes like bridging the gap between the fraud teams and the identity teams, which is interesting. And so there's just a massive just lack of education in the space even today.
yep,
I think on the enterprise side, there's this. merger of identity and security happening. On the
Yep.
customer side, there is a merging of identity and fraud happening. But
Right.
that
Right.
is happening slower than on the enterprise side. But I think soon there's going to be just a massive flood of these teams finally aligning and clicking
Yep.
and being in a position where they can significantly reduce fraud.
Nice. All right. Well, I appreciate this. I think I got all my questions answered. Is there anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't talk about?
One thing that we didn't really spend much time on was the identity verification piece,
Oh yeah, yeah.
right? And
Answer that too.
so
Yeah.
um, just around how how most organizations these days, when somebody needs to reset a credential, whether it's a password
Hmm.
or MFA or just be issued a new one, or they're onboarding an employee, that process for most organizations today looks the same as it did 20 years ago.
Right.
And so it's typically calling up the help desk and saying, "Hey, this is Ken. I need to reset my password. Help me out here." And they'll say, "Well, gee, Ken, I'd love to help you, but you got to give me your manager's name and the date that you started at the company,"
Right.
which is easy to figure out.
Yeah.
And so what the hackers will typically do is they'll hang up the phone with the help desk. They'll call up Ken and they'll say,
Hmm.
"This is your IT team. We're doing a verification of your security questions. Can you confirm with me your manager's name and the date that you started?" And Ken will be like, "Absolutely, sure." And then they'll
Sure.
hang
Yeah.
up with Ken. They'll call the support desk back and they'll say, "Hey, it's Ken. I need to reset my password. Here's my manager's name and
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
the date that I started." And that's usually how a lot of these attacks happen. And so organizations are really starting to have to rethink how they do that credential issuance. And what we're seeing is
Yep.
many businesses are actually taking away the ability of the help desk entirely to reset credentials, and they're moving to a more secure self-service process that
Hmm.
requires a location check, a document check, a phone number check,
Yeah.
and other things that um, you know, raise the barrier of such an easy attack.
Yeah. No, and again, there's certainly been tons of attacks that way, and we've all seen all along. And but it really does also go back to that process period because again, you're automating it, you're saving money, you're doing stuff. This is not like a harder thing. It's just it's both better operationally and better security wise.
That's right. And like one of the things, we spent a lot of time talking about MFA and FIDO.
Hmm.
FIDO is like a gold standard credential. It's phishing resistant, it's secure, it's a good user experience, it's all these good things. But if you're relying on knowledge-based factors to issue that credential to the user,
Hmm.
like street you
Yeah.
grew up on and
Right.
the
Right.
day that you started the company, like that's the weakest link then.
Right.
Right. So you have to think about these controls on a level playing field because, it's similar to like if you had a bulletproof identity verification system, that nobody could get around, but the next thing you do afterwards is give the person an A character password.
Right.
Like you might as
So
well not do it. Right.
right.
So
Right.
it's you have to think about both of these solutions at the same time. And I think this is where identity security controls are really going. And businesses are having to think about these things holistically from the moment that they start interviewing somebody all the way to the moment that they offboard them. How do they have like a continuous verification flow?
Yeah. I've seen some of your new products in that space. The Affirm products have that really really awesome work there. Um, Perfect. Cool. All right. Well, Boyd, I really enjoyed this, and as always, I'm looking forward to seeing you out at RSA. I'm sure we'll get together a little bit. Any closing remarks for everybody?
No, I look forward to the RSA conference. Look forward to seeing you there, and look forward to doing another one of these someday.
Awesome. This is super fun. So if anybody watching has any questions, please reach out to your Gotham rep or to Hyper HYPR, and we will be glad to talk to you about how to get forward with better identity. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.